Hello, hello.
Hello. All
I'm
right.
doing well, my friend. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. Let's see. Before we start, uh, uh, um, I'm just gonna. I'm trying to check if my sister is watching because she. There's a special reason I asked her to come watch today. Um, Even if she can only be here for 2 seconds. All right, here it is. Look at that. Look at that beauty over there. This. So my sister gave me a some bed sheets for Christmas, and they're white and pink and sparkly, and they say, "Always be yourself, unless you can be a unicorn." Um,
I approve that message.
Definitely. All right then. So, Zahnzee, please, to the people that may or may not be watching, or may or may not be watching later, please introduce yourself.
Will do. I'd love to. Hi, everybody. My name is Zahnzee. I'm an Irish Republican socialist. I derive my politics from the politics of James Connolly, who was a late 19th century Irish revolutionary and took part in the rising of 1916 that ultimately took his life, but ushered forth the concept of an Irish republic that would reject all forms of kind of tyranny from monarchies, and enshrined within the Irish people a sense of that there should be a commonship, that things should not be owned by people and things should be owned in common by each other for the betterment of each other. So those politics I took with me to my day, and I still have those politics. I make it sound like I've been around since the 18 fucking hundreds. In a nutshell, Irish Republican socialism is the idea that socialism and republicanism are interwoven in the fabric of our national struggle, and because of that, any Republican movement on the island of Ireland needs to be socialist in character. Otherwise, it's fundamentally failed to achieve the independence it spent the bones of 1,000 years trying to fight for.
I enjoy that idea. But Ireland is not a socialist nation per se today.
No.
So could you explain just like basically how how the political system works in Ireland?
Okay, so we're a republican constitutional democracy. We have a republic, so we have separation of powers between. We have a president who's the head of state, but has no legislative powers except given to them by our parliament, which is called Dáil Éireann. The Dáil is separated into two houses. We have the main house, which is the Dáil itself, and then there's the Seanad, which is the upper house. Laws have to get passed between them, but all of the legislative power is within Dáil Éireann. But the Dáil generates its right to rule and derives all of its legislative powers from the constitution itself. So the Dáil is. It's hamstrung and constrained by the Constitution. So if ever there is to be an amendment to that Constitution, it has to go under public referendum. So the people who get elected to run the country don't really get to run it as they see fit. They are bound by rules that we, the people, get to curate and decide.
Well, that's pretty neat though. Like it's pretty nice that they don't get to run roughshod over you guys, I guess.
I mean, they try. Oh God, they try.
So, so you don't you don't believe that a monarchy would be the you don't want to get back to or back to, I don't know. Were you guys ever under the monarchy? I'm sorry, my Irish history is not very good. So maybe you can teach me a thing or two here. But you would
monarchy wise. Sorry, go on.
so you would rather it stay a republic and then work with the socialism part. I take it.
Yeah. It's which do you want me to go through first? The idea of republicanism into socialism, or republican socialism, or the concept of monarchy within the Irish kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah, you can go
the
for
sense of Irishness and monarchy.
yeah. So let's take the monarchy first. Let's take down
No
the
worries.
queen a couple pegs.
Well, you know what polling in Britain says that about, I think it's 45% of the population, no, 45% of those polled said that they are hoping that Queen Elizabeth is the last monarch in that line. But Ireland for a long time has been, our history has been dominated by our large neighbour to the east of us. Um, the island of Britain for a long time has dominated what kind of comes in and out of the island of Ireland, um, mainly because it's a closer connection to kind of like mainland Europe itself. So, what should be two sister islands that share a Celtic lineage and a Celtic language, kind of like a subset of kind of like ethno-linguistic cultures that kind of intermingle into each other to create a very distinctive kind of like way of existing culturally and socially, distinct from the rest of Europe. Britain used to subjugate the islands, and that heavily ties into why we reject monarchy, because we've seen what it's like to be the unwanted subject, and we don't ever want anyone, regardless of where they are in the world, to be an unwanted subject.
All right. Um, and so to go with the socialism into republicanism and socialism part, do you see any way? Do you see any way that uh, um, Ireland could become socialist or turn more towards socialism without the republic, so to speak?
It's very possible that Ireland could become socialist without the Republic. It's mainly a case of that we can never ignore what are kind of like the cultural conditions within a place, because that will often determine the avenues available to you. Republicanism is like the essentially kind of like the dominant political mode in Ireland, where we would like, we reject titles, we reject the concept of like kings, we reject like lords, manors, things like that. We just we wholeheartedly reject the idea. So anything political within this country that has to have any sort of, if you're going the electoral means, has to kind of couch itself in republicanism, because that's kind of just the way we've always considered our place on the world stage. And a lot of it comes from the French Revolution, and I agree with James Connolly's words, where I consider the American Revolution to be an aborted Republican Revolution, where it basically within 200 years it started charging its own citizens a tax that made the Boston tea taxes look like spare change, and it came down to the idea that like what a republic is the idea that a place should be held in commons and not owned by lords. And I think that completely and utterly aligns with socialist principles, which should be that you should not have the individual agency of people engaged in labor. You should not have that action owned by private individuals. It's the idea that people should be free to kind of like intermingle with each other based off of their own intuitions, and be able to kind of like free association, freedom of all of the different liberties attached with all of the promises of the French Revolution. The Irish, like the Irish in the 1700s, we absolutely ate that up, because we saw that that was exactly what we needed in the context of our oppression under British monarchy and under British colonial occupation. And that tradition is still alive and well within the Irish people, where we really like our constitution. We really like our republic. And there's a case of like, because republicanism and socialism can be so efficiently knitted together, yes, we could achieve socialism without it, but it's almost like you're handicapping yourself by not. It's like deliberately going into a game of golf, like saying, oh, okay, I'm going to start 3 shots down. Why? Because I can. It's like, why would you? The seeds are so beautifully put into the ground. Just go for it. Adopt this system and apply a Republican system to it, or apply a socialist system to it.
Yeah. So you guys, and by you guys, I obviously mean the Irish. You have you don't like the Brits too much. I'm gathering.
Well, no, this is a key distinction. This is a very important one. We have absolutely no problem with the British people. We have a problem with the institutions that the monarchy has put in place through which to kind of like to create subservient obedience of their own people. There was a document written in 1868, I think it was, called the Fenian Manifesto. The Fenians were a group of they were an American Irish group, actually. There's a lot of Irish people in America because of the famine in 1846. That was a dark period in our history. The Fenians were an Irish group set up in America who was kind of tasked, and it was very important to them whether or not Ireland kind of was doing well. And they supported violent revolution, but there was a very, 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 very important distinction in that manifesto they wrote, and that it was they advocate violent revolution because there is no other means left. And they highlight in that document that when we bring arms to bear on the British institutions, we mean no war against any person, man, woman, or child in England or the surrounding nations. All the war we want to wage is against the institutions that have enslaved you along with us, but has convinced you that it is in your interests to go along with their enslavement of us. So we've no problem with the British people. It's the institutions we have an issue with.
All right. So I guess you could say it's a good thing that you have an Irish Republican army. So tell me about
that's a complicated history. There's been at least 6 or 7 different IRAs.
Yeah. Okay. So let's skip that part for today, because we're mainly here because of socialism. So how do the since you guys are fairly democratic, I imagine you guys have parties in Ireland. By the way, excuse my ignorance. I know very little about Ireland, so I am.
Oh, no problem. If you have any questions, just ask away.
Yeah.
I rather people not feign ignorance and just say, "Hey, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Hey, answer this for me."
Yeah.
I much prefer those people because it means I don't have to. I don't have to kind of like walk back something. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to learn. That's part of why I, have this project going. So tell me a little bit about the different parties that you guys have in Ireland.
Okay, the party system in Ireland is actually quite interesting. I drew up a flow chart for myself that
If you want to share the flow chart.
I'm going to I'll snip it and take it in because it's the history of the Irish political system can essentially be summed up in one party, and that's Sinn Fein. And that's because Sinn Fein was founded in 1905, and it has split about 6 different times between, the last split happened in 2019. A lot of the electoral kind of progress politically in this country has come from parties that find their root in Sinn Fein. And the funniest thing about Sinn Fein is Sinn Fein weren't anti-monarchy. They wanted a dual monarchy, like you saw in Austria and Hungary.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the most ironic thing about the whole thing. Arthur Griffith's Sinn Fein, they wanted a dual monarchy. They had no issue swearing allegiance to the King of Britain. They wanted a return to the political union before 1800. Before there was a act passed in Westminster in 1800 called the Act of Union that incorporated the Kingdom of Ireland into the United Kingdom, so it became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And as a result, Ireland became kind of like a constituent state, whereas Sinn Fein wanted Ireland to be a separate kingdom, but with the same king. So you had the kingdoms of Austria and the kingdom of Hungary that shared one monarch. That's what Sinn Fein wanted. It's so far away from what Sinn Fein wants now.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna bring up this chart on my stream so that people can see what we're dealing with there. Okay, so Sinn Fein. And then I see you have a sort of Labour Party kind of thing going. But okay, so let's go with the Sinn Fein for now. The Sinn Fein is sort of, it seems to me at least, like it is more or less like the mother of all parties in Ireland.
Yes. It comes back to I mentioned at the very beginning that James Connolly, actually founder of the Labour Party, um, yeah, 1912, founder of the Labour Party, along with Jim Larkin, and I can't remember the other person. He took part in a rising against the British Empire in Easter 1916. After that rising, the British media blamed a small, innocuous party called Sinn Fein, who weren't that popular, didn't have that many members, but they called it the Sinn Fein Rising. And then after that, the British government made a big mistake and they executed a lot of the survivors from 1916, the Rising. And one of the reasons it was very unpopular is because James Connolly was actually fatally injured and they still shot him. So that got a huge public outcry from the people of Ireland, and Sinn Féin exploded in popularity. And they then dominated the Irish general elections for Irish seats to go into Westminster. But they had a policy of was it? Abstention, I can't think of the word, but they didn't take their seats in Westminster, which basically said that they won like 60 odd seats and then those seats were empty in Westminster. Their argument being, we don't recognise Westminster as our parliament, so we're not taking our seats in there.
All right. So the Labour Party then, how do they operate in like? Okay, are they a proper social democratic, somewhat left-leaning party, or is it more Labour in name only?
Probably the better way of going through it would be to describe the lay of the land at the moment as it is, and then I can kind of go into the history surrounding the parties themselves, kind of like to unpack it slowly.
Yeah.
At the moment, there is a Social Democratic Party that was founded in 2015, I think. 2015, yes. The Social Democrats would take up what would be a traditional kind of like centre-left, moving to kind of like not quite left-wing, but think of Labour in Britain. Irish Labour was made in that mould of being a workers' party. They slowly became the party of the Labour aristocracy, kind of like teachers' unions, kind of like unionism, but the kind of unionism where trying to protect the paid role and not the person in the role, to make sure that the employer always has somebody in that position, but they're not really that interested in the actual employee and how the employee is doing. A little fucked up what happened to Labour because of that. I consider them, they're not really social democrat anymore, but I'm not sure if I would call them centre right. They're kind of like an aimless party at the moment. I don't think they really have an identity. They're currently being led by a politician called Alan Kelly, who's trying to re-find their kind of working class roots, but the party is kind of on the out at the moment.
All right. So I do feel like that's a thread that I see in Europe, that a lot of the sort of Labour parties, the social democratic parties, they do seem like they have sort of lost their footing. They don't know exactly how to deal with the current zeitgeist, if you want to call it that. We definitely have that problem in Norway, and when I talked to Tardov about Sweden, I got the same impression about that. What was the name of the guy again?
Alan Kelly.
Kelly.
Put in Alan Kelly TD.
Let's see. TD. Irish politician, author. Oh, okay. Has been leader of the Labour Party since April 2020. So, what's your take on him?
Alan Kelly. I don't know yet. He's said some pretty good things in the Dáil. I've liked some of the things I've heard from him, but he has a lot of baggage to undo. Like he basically has to re-steer a party back to its roots. I'm not sure if he's the man to do it, but I don't have huge critiques of him at the moment, but I also don't have much good to say about him.
Okay.
He did have an amazing one line where our government right now is like an unholy union between two parties that split in very acrimonious manners. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are arch enemies. They fucking hate each other. They were literally on opposite sides of a civil war in 1922. They're in coalition with each other and the Green Party right now. So it's very interesting. But Alan Kelly basically said that the leader of Fianna Fáil, his name is Micheál Martin. Alan Kelly said that it seems like Micheál Martin's plan for becoming leader of the country was becoming leader of the country. And from there, he had no plan.
Oh, that's never a good idea. All right, so that's the Labour Party, briefly summed up. But I do see that you supposedly have a socialist party as well. You mentioned a Green Party.
Our Green Party, founded in 1983, it pretends it's left wing. It pretends it's eco-socialist.
Oh.
They're currently trying to get their members to agree on a Canadian free trade agreement that'll give companies the legislative power to sue the government for interfering in their profits.
Lovely.
So yeah, they're green capitalists.
Basically TPP then.
I don't know TPP. I'll have to look into it. But yeah, the Green Party in Ireland are just green capitalists. The party is being gutted at the moment, and they're looking like they're probably going to lose all of their seats in the next election. They're deeply unpopular. I think it's a third of their party, their young members, have all left the party and joined socialist parties.
Oh, really? I I would love to see that happen here in Norway. Yeah. So to sort of just mirror it up to the Norwegian system, the Green Party is currently growing in Norway.
Okay.
They have about 5%, and they have pointed towards wanting to create a coalition with the Labour Party. Now, the Labour Party doesn't want to make a coalition with the Green Party, but the Green Party has also been open to working with the Conservatives. So that party is, in many ways, a bit of an ideological mess in Norway. So that's kind of why I asked about them in Ireland.
Yeah, I have found that green parties around the world seem to suffer that problem. They're like 100% on the train of the environment is important. We need to save the environment, but then they fundamentally miss the problem that the underlying issue surrounding the climate is that we have an economic system based upon short-term turnover.
Yeah,
Where it just everything is in 5-year plans, and the Green Party saying we got to look 25 years into the future, and capitalists are saying, but that's like 10 budgeting. We can't make profits. We can't look that far into the future. So we're not gonna. So you fundamentally have to tackle businesses. What's the statistic? It's like 71% of all emissions come from like 100 corporations. Unless green parties around the world are willing to like use the legislative apparatus to like put a noose around those companies and say you like 110% of your profits are going into tax revenue so that we can heavily reinvest your profits into renewable energy. Unless that is the principal Green Party position, they're not fucking Green parties.
Yeah, and I also think that just on the philosophical, sort of historical level, I do think that the Green parties, and this is just guessing, by the way, but I get a feeling that if a Green Party member were to be asked about socialism and communism, they would probably imagine like a very like a Russian plant where you have all of the smog going up into the air, and that's what they would associate with that idea, and thus they would go into, oh no, socialism doesn't sound very eco-friendly to me. But again, that might be pure bullshit. They might have a way more nuanced idea of socialism. But in my opinion, I think that Green parties should always work with socialism or socialist parties, because I do think that capitalism is inherently an enemy to the environment.
And it's I actually think it's worse than that, because I don't even think it's that capitalism is an enemy to the climate, because that implies that capitalism has actively identified the planet as a thing it's against. I think it's not even aware of what it's doing, and it's just blindly stumbling around and destroying everything it touches. Um, like to me, that's worse, because it's like if you turn to an enemy and say, "Hey, you're my enemy," well, then they'll kind of go, "Okay, fair enough. We are now at war." Whereas
Yeah,
capitalism doesn't even realize it's at war with the planet. So green parties that don't identify that socialist undercurrent fundamentally are going to fail at their final hurdle, which is actually saving the damn planet. Because right now, what green parties are doing is trying to make money saving the environment.
yeah,
And here's the problem with capitalism. Everything fundamentally comes down to the idea of profit. So if there's no profit to be made under capitalism, then you won't save the planet.
yes,
And
exactly.
there's very little profit to be made in reducing your profits.
Who would have thunk? Okay, so now we can move on. So the Socialist Party, is that still a thing, or?
The Socialist Party, I think it is. I need to double check, because I think it's there's the main left wing alliance that you have in Ireland is called Solidarity People Before Profit, and Rise is a part of the group, kind of like the Allegiance group. They have 5 members in the Dáil at the moment. Our parliament is 166 seats, so 5 isn't a number worth scoffing at.
No.
They hold on, let me
Although,
just.
if you hold 5 people, you could potentially end up in a very powerful position if people need those 5 people to get a majority.
Oh yeah. We were so close. I mean, so close to getting like a cross stitch coalition government of left leaning parties. It would have been like a 5 party coalition.
Oh,
Apologies for all, apologies, Jesus. Apologies for all the coughing. My throat's really dry for some reason.
oh, that's all right. I feel like I cough and sneeze and whatnot all the time, so I guess my viewers are used to it. So
Oh, no worries.
yeah,
But like the Socialist Party of Ireland, let's see if I can pull up their Wikipedia for a second, just so I can have a quick look. There we go. Yeah, no, they are still active, but there used to be a Socialist Party TD in the Dáil about 10 to 15 years ago called Joe Higgins, who basically kind of like led the charge in a way. And one of the things that he did that was quite influential was he took his state salary as being a TD, and gave himself minimum wage and funneled the rest of it back into funding the actual party itself, so that they could hire people into being activists and organizers. So there was an element of kind of like, oh wait, so not all politicians are in it for the money, and that woke a lot of people up to the idea that, you know, maybe it's not about enriching oneself, and maybe it's about generating kind of like social movements. And it kind of it opened up a creek in the Irish electoral movement for left-wing agitators.
yeah, that sounds pretty awesome though. Like, so we have a politician in Norway. He's the leader of the Red Party in Norway, and he occasionally he stands up in the parliament and he asks for lower wages for the politicians. It always gets voted down because the Labour Party and the Conservative Party mainly, they never want to lower their own wages. And
Yeah.
I do think that it's interesting that the only group in the country that gets to decide their own wage never wants to lower it, even though
Yeah,
they
that's an odd one, yeah.
yeah.
Because
So
like let me give you a very quick overview in terms of like salaries. A TD is I was hoping I'd find the number, but the time it would take me to say that. Um,
it's all right. You can take your time.
where is this? Where is it? I can't find the exact number, but they get a wage as well as getting what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a pension or something.
No, it's I think it's allowance. You know, when like if you have travel expenses, they'll reimburse the travel expenses. There's a
Oh
word for
yeah.
that. I just can't remember what it's called.
Um,
Um,
Yeah, like reimbursements, I guess. But I know what you mean. I just don't. I'm not versed enough in English to.
Yeah. But it's the basic salary of a backbench TD, which basically means just like somebody who isn't in government, is just under €100,000 a year. So like that's anyone who gets elected to parliament is already one of the most well-paid people in the country.
Yeah.
And let me find out. If you're a government TD, the what would be referred to as the prime minister, we call it a Taoiseach. The salary is in and around €200,000, and
Jesus.
this doesn't include things like pensions, because you can have a TD's pension, you can have a ministerial pension, and you can have a Taoiseach's pension, as well as all of your allowances, and then you have like private cars. You have your residence, so you can kind of claim a second residence in Dublin, and you can get tax incentives off of that. And then you also have there's I can't remember off the top of my head, but as you can see, it's like where the hell is all of that money going?
Yeah.
And it's I'll give you a really good example, like Sinn Fein, the current iteration of Sinn Fein. One of the things they ran on was just like drastically reducing and halting pay rises, because like during the pandemic, our government voted to raise their wages.
Of course it does.
That was while people were laid off and on an emergency payment that they're going to have to pay income tax on. And the government was raising their own wages.
How did that not cause a riot?
A conversation I once had with a few French people put this into perfect perspective for me. They once asked me, like, why don't the Irish riot? Because, like, we've had horrendous austerity taxes after the 2008 financial crash. And the French couple I was talking to, they were like, if we had half of what you're going through, we would be overturning cop cars on the street. And I think part of it comes down to the idea like the Irish public in general are very kind of like docile and apologetic. Part of that could come down to the idea that like as a peoples, we've kind of gotten used to not being seen and not being heard, because that was a survival tactic that got you through British occupation. But we're about 4 generations out from that now, so I feel like it should be starting to crack. Our young generation is a lot more mobile and a lot more vocal. We had 2 referendum campaigns in the past decade. One to introduce same-sex marriage. We had to amend the constitution for that, and we had to amend the constitution to legally allow abortion. Abortion was criminalized in this country constitutionally up until maybe 3 years ago, and those were mainly driven by kind of like young activists between maybe the ages of like 17 and maybe 40.
Huh. All right.
So we're starting to become more active and vocal, but what I think the reason you didn't see people rioting right now is because pretty much everyone's deathly afraid of coronavirus right now, because our health service is being held together with chewing gum and sticky tape. In the entire country, I think we have just under 300 ICU beds, and that's for the whole country. We can't survive an outbreak of horrendous proportions, so nobody's trying to do like public appearances. We're trying really hard.
All right. One sec. There you go. Yeah, so that's really interesting. Like, I do feel like the French is a very interesting people, though, because I feel like if a politician farts the wrong way in France, then you see fires in Paris.
Oh yeah, like the yellow vests were a beautiful moment in international politics, because it kind of showed that, hey, there's still fight left in the general proletariat, and it came from truck drivers.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people kind of forget about that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the government was trying to do something to truck drivers, and how it became the yellow vests was because all of the truck drivers, they went on strike, and to identify themselves, they just took out the yellow vests that they're legally required to carry in their trucks. And they just
Yeah.
marched the streets, and it kind of triggered a global movement. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that movement was commandeered by conservatives and fascists.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
My issue with the like, because I feel like the origins of the Yellow Vest movement is a very beautiful thing, whereas it sadly ended up containing a lot of right wingers that was just like, I don't want any refugees in my country, and
Yeah.
so okay, so let's move on from the socialist part. I do feel like we have already, but so I see that you have written down Communist Party of Ireland. I am going to assume that they don't have a lot of traction.
Unfortunately, no. I wish they had more traction, just in terms of like being a thorn in the fucking side of our neoliberal parties, because having representation of a communist party to openly and unashamedly espouse Marxist-Leninist principles in a parliament, to basically demonstrate the futility of the entire bourgeois electoral system, I think would do immense good in terms of like in a way, like pulling back the curtain so that everybody could see the strings. So in a way, I do think that the Irish Communist Party kind of in a way betrayed its own cause by just not being more effective. And if they get annoyed at me for saying that, I'll just say to them, you're Marxists, you identify that what you do is more important than what you are, and you've done fuck all. And like, I'm very critical because they would be one of the closest to me, and I'm deeply upset. They also they split from a youth group called the Connolly Youth Movement recently, and part of the problem was because the Communist Party of Ireland was engaging in democratic centralism, but they were kind of foregoing the democratic part, and they were trying to dictate and liaison the kind of like the subservient members beneath them to try kind of like push them in certain directions without fully incorporating this the CYM is Connolly Youth Movement, trying to incorporate their ideas. So it became very dictatorial and kind of very authoritative. So the Connolly Youth Movement eventually said, at this point, we have a separated identity to you. We'll work with you, but we're not subservient to you. This is not what communism is. So the CPI, I feel like they're in danger of becoming irrelevant, because there's an element kind of like of a crystallized tradition amongst the senior members where they're more attached to the 20th century, and I don't think they've come into the 21st century yet.
Yeah, I do get the impression that that's a lot of maybe older communists, at least, they are very attached to the 20th century, especially since, you know, the 20th century showed us a lot of like communist what can you say, victories around the world, with like the Soviet Union, for those people that subscribe to that idea, and Mao's China, and all of these different socialist countries that were led by communist thinkers and revolutionaries. And then today we don't have too much of that, and then you get the sort of nostalgia goggles, and you see it. A lot of the aesthetics of communism today is still the again, Russian plants and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and without making the mistake of launching into what would be Soviet apologia, people think that this is because they like they stand these regimes, when in reality the reason we talk about like the USSR, Mao's Cultural Revolution, the reason we talk about kind of like all of the different communist revolutions in Africa, like the entire South American like subcontinent, I keep thinking of India for some reason, all of the different left-wing movements that happen, and they're under a Marxist-Leninist thread. The reason we regard them as experiments worth looking at is not because they quote unquote succeeded, but because they presented an alternative reality, a way of existing as an economic national unit that wasn't based on a property first, private, individual, liberal sense of existing within kind of like a bourgeois distribution of wealth. It put huge amounts of pressure on kind of like the Euro-communist groups, the social democratic groups in Europe, especially. Like you'd live in a country that's one of the descendants of this pressure, where a lot of the left-wing groups that existed within democracy basically had to say, hold on a second, why do they have more rights than we do when you're supposed to be the champion of liberty? And without that, when the Berlin Wall fell in, I think it was 1989, the Sino-Soviet split, all of the different reintegrations, Deng Xiaoping's moved towards kind of like a market solution for the isolationism. This alternative reality, a different way of existing, has started to kind of emerge into a mirage in a way, where now we're just seeing different ways to compete in global capitalism, when in the 20th century we were seeing different ways of being something other than global capitalism. And I think a lot of communist parties are nostalgic for that sense of hope, because Mark Fisher wrote a phenomenal book on it, of the idea that we've actually passed the stage of capitalist realism. We're in a different stage at this point. But it was that idea that we've forgotten how to be anything other than liberal subjects existing in a capitalist hegemony. And I think communists are terrified of falling into that they then are stuck in nostalgia. I think that's the reason.
Yeah, but that's as good of an analysis that I could get as I could give. I do think that it's you definitely have a point with that. So okay, let's take a quick look at like the underground movements of Ireland. Do you guys have like what Sargon would describe as an Antifa problem in Ireland?
An Antifa problem. Oh, lovely. We would have active Antifa groups in Ireland, but one of the things to remember as well is like the island of Ireland is currently a partitioned island, where part of the territory is still occupied by British civil and military institutions. Since the partitioning in 1922, 6 counties in that island have been under occupation from a Republican perspective. So a lot of that animosity went into groups up in the north. So we would have had kind of like paramilitary groups. So a lot of what people call Antifa would exist in parallel to those ideas, where we had an anti-imperial struggle in front of us. And it meant it's like one of the things it meant that fascism didn't really get the chance to emerge in Ireland. And when it did, it was shut the fuck down, because there was an active Marxist movement trying to currently win a civil war that it had lost 10 years ago, unfortunately. We had an active militant left-wing movement in the country, engaging in that Republican tradition. Now, I can get into conversations with people about how maybe it went off the fucking rails in the 70s and the 80s and led to a lot of needless bloodshed and a lot of people who didn't need to die. We call it the Troubles. It was a massive civil war. So we have a lot of those little underground movements. The two that'll come to my mind, kind of like the Provisional IRA, the New IRA, the Real IRA, all of the different paramilitary groups. They're an unfortunate part of the history of the island, but they find their roots in partitioning by the British state. To maintain kind of like the industrial north of the country around Belfast, Larne, Derry. I'll call it Londonderry if I want to give them something, but like in my heart it's Derry.
All right.
I don't know if that answered your question. I'm not actually sure.
Well, to a certain degree it did. So if you were to let's say that you're a 18 or 19-year-old socialist, anti-fascist in Ireland, and you want to organize in some way. Would you say that would be easy in Ireland?
It's easier now than it's ever been because of one group, and I've already mentioned them. It's the Colony Youth, Connolly. Why do I struggle with that? The Connolly Youth Movement. They're a youth group. They're aligned with international left-wing groups. They have kind of an international presence, and they go to the international. They represent themselves. They have exploded in membership. They're a Marxist-Leninist youth party. They used to be affiliated with the CPI, but they disaffiliated. For if you're a young person in Ireland right now, and you're a socialist with left-wing ideals, that's probably the best place for you. They do a lot of on-the-ground agitation. They do kind of like theory readings. I went to I'm too old to be officially a part of them. I'm 31. Their cutoff is 30. But I sat in on some of their meetings, theory meetings. They're currently reading Foundations of Leninism by Joseph Stalin in terms of understanding the Marxist-Leninist, I'd say creed, fuck's sake. There's a critique of Marxism that it engages in religiosity, and there I just gave one of those demonstrations, treating the texts like creeds. They're currently unpacking what is one of the central tenets of Marxist-Leninism, which is just understanding the role Leninism plays in adapting Marxism to 20th century conditions, and also the contribution of the concept of imperial capitalism. That is such an important concept that Lenin gave us. Like, I would recommend everybody just look into Lenin's theory of imperialism, because it basically explains the plight of Africa right now. The world in general, but Africa in particular. So, like, right now, the Connolly Youth Movement, that is where you go. That if you are a young socialist in Ireland who has kind of like a left-wing Marxist socialist lean to you, the Connolly Youth Movement is where you can go to be met up with like-minded people, to form a sense of purpose in your community, so that you can actually help your community rather than just reading a few books, going onto Twitter, and then like slagging somebody.
Oh yeah, I do feel like the left has a huge problem, and that huge problem is called the online left. Where I get the feeling that, like, if you're an ML, for example, if you're an online leftist, you're supposed to hate everyone that is left wing if they're not MLs. Same thing with anarchists, and like everyone we have so much infighting. So do you have any idea or any feel for what like an anarchist would think about the Connolly Youth Movement?
Well, they're Marxist-Leninists, so they do fundamentally believe in state seizure and utilizing the state apparatus to deconstruct bourgeois control and to utilize the organs of what would be state oppression, like things like the ability to enact laws, the ability to use the judiciary, the ability to create institutions, the ability to use the courts. So anarchists would see all of this as illegitimate uses of power, but the Marxist-Leninists would argue that if workers do not seize these institutions, the bourgeoisie will just seize them and use them to crush us. There's a bit of an irreconcilable difference, I guess, there, because Marxist-Leninists are willing to use state systems. Anarchists fundamentally want to get rid of state systems. So how do anarchists feel about the Connolly Youth Movement? I'd imagine they think they're misguided. I would like to think they would work with each other, because, like, we're nowhere near getting communists to seize political institutions. So the anarchist critique of Marxist-Leninists right now, I feel, is based entirely on the hypothetical, well, what if you won, when they're so far from winning right now that there's no reason for them not to work with each other. Yeah, so ultimately, I would say to them, like...
what were you saying?
Oh, I'd say, like, ultimately what I'd say to the anarchist is, like, you have your political ideals, you have your tendency, and you have your formulations of how you want things to go, but neither of you are anywhere near being able to actually have the political power to create societies that will take those ideals. There's a position I have in politics. Your politics are what you do, not what you are. So if you're an anarchist, you do anarchism. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. And like, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, you do Marxist-Leninism. It doesn't matter if you call yourself that. And you as an individual part of what you do as a left-wing person is empowering communities to have a sense of solidarity to overcome the alienation they feel. Socialism, like it's in the name, it's social. It's about empowering communities to look in rather than looking to the market to solve their solutions. Rather than paying Jeff Bezos, was it like 50 million fucking an hour so that they can have something hand delivered to their door, knock on your neighbor and say, hey, I'm having a shit day. Can I have a cup of tea? Empowering communities to feel close to each other. And this is what I would say to anarchists and Marxist-Leninists. Both of you are so far away from where you want to be that you're literally not in conflict right now.
Yeah,
you will eventually, but right now you're not.
Yeah, so that's sort of my take on like, let's say, Marxism, Leninism, and anarchism, is that the current world we live in is liberal and capitalist, and for the time being, everyone that sees themselves as a socialist should have an issue with that, with the system we find ourselves in, and it's in all of our interests to sort of dismantle that system. So why don't we work together with dismantling that system, and then we can, along the way figure out the best way to go forward after we potentially win. And the thing about politics is that you don't get a prize for losing, and so if we do all this infighting, we will never be able to, like, none of us will win. The neoliberal hegemony will still claim to power. Because they take advantage of our infighting.
The answer I'd even have to that is because this is my understanding of history right now. And anarchists, I'm looking at you on this one. If you don't work together, what you're doing is you're allowing what is historically small, very well connected, very well trained and very well read vanguard Marxist-Leninists to take the opportunity to seize states because there's nothing else they can do. They're just going to take the opportunity that's presented to them. So by not working with people, you're essentially creating the conditions where there is nothing but that as an alternative. So it's just like, I haven't developed that fully, but it just, my understanding of history has basically been that Marxist-Leninism doesn't require a critical mass. It just requires the opportunity to seize the apparatus. And if they do, it's then about putting people into positions of power to take power away from the bourgeoisie. They don't need the majority. They just need the opportunity. So anarchists, if you don't want that to happen, work with them to make sure that you get to curate the hegemony of those groups so that you can put your values into those parties.
So would you, and this is just a curiosity I got from the way that you're speaking right now, would you consider yourself an ML?
No, I'm a Republican socialist. See, here's the funny thing. Marxist-Leninism is very, very similar to the strain of Marxism that I follow under James Connolly and how it forms our Republican Socialist perspective. The IRSP, the Irish Republican Socialist Movement, was founded in 1899, I think it was. It had its sights on a politically viable route to power through the actual Labour Party itself, but it was unashamedly militant. It had a paramilitary group. It had the Irish Citizen Army, where they would use that group to suppress oppression. They would use that group to defend workers who are being locked out or who are being targeted by strikebreakers. So there was a commitment to engage both politically and militaristically, given the idea that oppressed peoples have the right to reject that oppression. That's a John Stuart Mill's argument. Like, that's the basis of English liberalism right there. So it's amusing how Irish republicanism used British liberalism to justify the overthrow of the British monarchy. That's just so ironically beautiful to me that it's like, how could it be false? And it's that idea that, like right there, you have something akin to the vanguard. You have the idea of democratic centralism, which On paper, democratic centralism is fucking perfect. The worst thing about it is that people have to do it, and people are inherently fucked up and flawed. I don't trust people to be able to be democratically centralized. I don't think people will be able to wield that power because they grew up in bourgeois incentive structures. So they're going to manipulate those ideals. It's because of the cultures we were raised within. I think democratic centralism could only work in a socialist population, and we're not a socialist population. We're a liberal population. We're inherently self-serving. We're inherently egoist. We're inherently selfish. So democratic centralism just appeals towards the most aggressive in that liberal mode. This is a critique I have of it. Maybe in the future, if we manage to kind of contest the hegemony and like curate a sense of like a quote unquote correct way of being, you know, the ideas of solidarity, the ideas of fostering community. Marx's basic philosophy of to each according to their ability, sorry, from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. Once people inherently adopt that as their default mode of being, then a democratic centralism could work because you have a group of people who won't view that hierarchy as something self-serving. And I deviated too far away from Irish Republican socialism. The difference between them is that the way ML state functions is that you have like a central party that orientates the legislative apparatus of that party, and then it is fed information from its Soviets and it informs them. Like the unions have no access to direct power. Like the syndicates that were formed by workers have no access to direct power. But what they do is they can influence the Soviets to present their issues up to the party itself. Republican socialism has a far more representative role of those groups because republics are all about representative groups. Like in Ireland, like our current system right now, we have our voting system isn't single, it isn't first past the post. We have proportional representation and single transferable vote, which basically means that, and it's enshrined in our constitution for I think it's for every 20,000 people in a group, there has to be at least one representative. And that model could so easily amend towards for every train driver union, there needs to be somebody in government representing those interests. For trans groups, there needs to, like, that group gets the right to caucus an individual to sit in government to advise on those matters. LGBT groups all get to individually announce a caucus so that they can vote themselves to select somebody to represent those interests. Sex workers can appoint somebody. All of the different groups can have representation within the republic because fundamentally a republic is about common ownership and a kind of a common engagement in a commons itself. It's not the idea that a government controls, it's that a government operates under the advisory of the people themselves. So it's why I think, personally, I think Republican socialism is just more dynamic than Marxism-Leninism, but it's less pragmatic, I guess. But it's just more dynamic. I think people can get more representation within it, which allows for a transition from kind of like the liberal mode we exist within, because representation really matters to liberals. Okay.
Oh yeah, but in that, let's say that we get to a point where we start to organize society in this way, because I do have a concern with the way that you describe it, but
Yep.
it's not like a that would never work concern. It's more like a I can see some dangers with it. And it's mainly that what I wouldn't want is that society would turn into some sort of like technocratic regime. And I do kind of feel like if you want to organize a technocratic regime, then you would have the same sort of starting blocks where you have we should have the people that know things be in control of things. If you get what I'm saying.
I do kind of get where you're coming from, but nowhere in what I'm advocating is the idea that like the people who understand banking should represent banking interests. No, it's people who have social A basic philosophy we can agree on is that social identity plays a role in how that society sees you. Therefore, it can impart material impact on your role in that society. So anybody who's impacted by a social identity has the right to representation within that society's legislative body. For instance, I'm pretty sure it never would have been constitutionally enshrined that marriage is between a man and a woman if there was somebody at the legislative table representing like gay and lesbian issues. The fact that they may have not been representative in those discussions meant that it may not have actually factored into the consideration. The idea is to basically I don't think there should be limits to the size of representative bodies that actually meet at these tables. I want to give more people power. I don't want to confine to like small little groups of things. Technocracy, I don't like technocracy personally. I don't like the idea that people who are good at something suddenly become the arbiters of like Elon Musk is really good at making rockets. What the fuck does he know about financial systems?
Yeah. So well then you mainly addressed my concern there, and well, it was put nicely to rest there. No, because I do feel like whenever we have this weird thing in Norway, I don't know if you have the same thing in Ireland, but when a party or two or three parties form a government in Norway, it's up to the newly elected prime minister to basically call their contacts and ask who wants to be like the minister of education, for example. And what bugs me about it is that our minister of healthcare is actually a great example of this. Instead of calling someone that has experience working with healthcare, she called an old like party colleague, a loyal servant to her party, and his experience is that he has worked in some hotels being like a receptionist and stuff like that, but he has been loyal to the party, and now he is the head of one of the most important departments in Norway. So it's like I want to see more representation of people that know what the fuck they're doing within these departments. But I also, like I said, I don't want things to be like, oh yeah, you know what you're talking about, and therefore you should have power over people.
No, yeah, I totally get what you mean. I think that there's two separate problems happening here, though, because there was a time in my life, like, yeah, we do have the same problem in Ireland where that a general election is called, we all vote for whoever we want, we get disappointed, we drink our sorrows away, the next morning we wake up and realize, oh fuck, that actually happened. And then what happens is everyone meets in the Dáil, and parties put forward candidates to be elected Taoiseach. They need to get a majority of the votes to be elected Taoiseach, and then that Taoiseach goes to the president, and the president basically says, okay, I recognise you as the head of parliament. That Taoiseach now gets to form a cabinet where they appoint members from any party, usually tends to be his own. So you get that sense of like, oh, you're loyal to me, when sometimes like the best person for the job could be an opposition TD who isn't even in your party. I would like to see that happen more often. Like, for instance, the problem is it comes down on ideological lines. Like, there's the Sinn Fein housing spokesperson, Owen O'Brien, I think his name is. Don't quote me on that name; it's probably wrong. He is a huge advocate for investing in social housing and gutting the private landlord business. About 80% of our sitting TDs are landlords, so you can understand how well that went down.
Yeah.
We have a huge problem in Ireland with housing, so you know we kind of have those conflict of interests. But I used to have the same perspective you, where I was kind of like, our Minister for Health has never worked in health. But then the thing that kind of occurred to me, and why I don't necessarily think what you're describing is a huge problem. Now, like I said, you're discussing two different things. The one thing you're mentioning is kind of like that party loyalty, where the best person for the job, and remember, the best person for the job isn't the best person in the party, it's the best person in the parliament.
Yeah.
The people elect a house. everyone in that house should be up for a ministerial position. The fact that it only gets given to one party or the party in majority immediately means that nearly half the country doesn't get represented in legislative power. That seems fucked up to me, and that seems to be our pride. But the other aspect of it, just say you had like Norway's best surgeon, fucking incredible, single-handedly saved 7 people's lives when he was drunk and hungover, dangling off of the side of a motorway because he was involved in the same car accident, and he knitted their knuckles back together. Amazing surgeon, and he went into politics because he wanted to stop car accidents. Would you be in favour of him being like put in charge of health?
Maybe more than a receptionist at some random hotel, at least. But
here is then the question I would ask: between them, whose skill set is best orientated towards managing the health sector? The person who should be in the operating room that you're taking out of the operating room to become a bureaucrat, or the person who spent their life organizing?
Okay, yeah, okay, sure. I get that. But then you can also have people that have worked with organizing the health sector or health sector on like a somewhat lower level, maybe instead.
Oh yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's people, because it's like being Minister for Health is about coordinating resources to make sure that hospitals have the available resources they have, to make sure that nursing homes have access to all the institutions, to make sure that all of the different kind of like societies have access to all of the funding afforded by the Department of Finance. Like being a really good GP does not qualify you to be good at organising. So the person who's really good at organising, I think, should be in that ministerial position. But again, we're not getting that because the best person for the job may not be in your party. It's like I used to be in this exact same boat where like I thought that like maybe the Minister for Transport should have been involved in civil planning. When is that skill set really that applicable to essentially, like, remember, ministerial positions are about organising the distribution of resources, not planning cities. So it's about the skill set of that position. Like the principal of a school could be a shit teacher as long as they give all of the good teachers access to the resources to teach.
Yeah, of course. And that's why I'm skeptical of like putting a surgeon, for example, at the head of the healthcare department in and of itself. But like I'm saying, like maybe people that have been working with like the organizing part of hospitals, stuff like that. Maybe those people would be working with the bureaucracy of hospitals would be more fitted.
Like you'll have like the chief medical officers, you'll have the kind of like heads of medicine, you'll have the to a large degree like general secretaries in charge of maintaining like donors into hospitals to make sure they're funded. Now I fucking hate the role they play in capitalism, but God, they're good at organizing things. No, I agree. Like people who have good relationships with people, like, hey, that matters. Like fundamentally government is about people, so being able to foster good relationships kind of does matter. People who are kind of like they know what the job entails would be like people who've spent time administering like a provincial level like organization responsible with distributing resources allocated by the national government. I'd imagine like you'd have provincial organizations in Norway where imagine if they had money provided to them by the state saying that, hey, this is your allocation, make sure that everyone in your region gets access to what they need. That person would be a good candidate to step up to national level because they understand the role of being somebody who receives that national services, so they can then be in a position to go to the provincial services to say, hey, what exactly do you need? I used to be in your situation, so I'm familiar with the kind of requests you'll give, so don't feel any pressure to kind of like blindside me with something, because 9 times out of 10 I'll know exactly why you want it, and we can create relationships here so that I can get you what you need.
Yeah, and like if you have a minister of education, for example, it would be helpful if that person is somewhat that knows what a cut to schools actually results in, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, but like I said, it's hard to find like the balancing between this is a good system and oh we're a technocracy now. Um, but
Well, just to remember, like one of the key aspects of technocracy is the idea that there is no public appointing. Like the general population don't get to appoint the technocrat.
yeah, well that's
And
sort
that
of how it
we can
is
get into a
right now. Like
conversation about like what is democracy. If like I fundamentally believe it's not democratic unless you have the right to withdraw a candidate. Like when you go to your general election, the person you elect, if you can't unelect them, I don't consider that democracy. I consider that just participatory oligarchy.
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, because like that's actually a very interesting thing because and again, like I know that we're focusing a little bit on Norway now, but that's how.
Before you get into it, do you mind if I just run to the bathroom?
Yeah, sure.
No worries, I'll be 2 seconds.
All right, I'll hold you to that. All right, now that Zahn Zee is gone, how do you guys feel about him? No, I'm just kidding. How do you guys feel today, chat? By the way, Chatbot01, thank you so much for following me for half an hour back. Please, people, consider pushing the subscribe button if you want to subscribe to me. I am going to try to give you some quality content going forward. I am noticing now that I'm talking with Zahn Zee about these things that I am not well read in these things. Like, I can barely hold my own in this conversation. I do feel like I'm very much like the layman's socialist, but it's a lot of fun. I do feel like I'm learning a lot from him, and he's a very intelligent guy and a lot of fun to play Rust with. We actually had a fun conversation about religion yesterday, and I want to pick that up with him again for another time when we can be in my wheelhouse. Maybe we'll do that on his stream if he wants to. So yeah, I hope you guys are doing all right. I hope you guys find this interesting, at least. Oh, damn it! I think I actually lost what I was going to ask him. Going to talk about some systems. Oh yeah, okay, I have it now. It feels. By the way, I need to point that out. It feels so good to be back. It feels wonderful to be back. To have my computer back. I had it fixed. The processor just went up and died on me, and so I had to fix it. And I've been playing Rust ever since I got back, and it's running beautifully. So yeah. I don't know how many people are watching right now. 3 people are watching according to. Should we do some marketing? Let's see if we can post the thing. Also, I'm planning some pretty cool guests in the future about in this project, so it's gonna be super fun. And oh god, I am terrified of talking to one of my guests because I find Zahnzee to be extremely intelligent. I think he has such a good knowledge of the different kinds of socialism, and the
I'm actually.
oh, thank you. Welcome back. And one
Glad
of
to
the
be
next
back.
yeah, one of the next guys I'm bringing on is he's such a fucking knowledgeable powerhouse. Anyway, so yeah, like I was saying, when we elect someone in Norway, they're elected for 4 years. and in that 4 years, they cannot resign.
Okay.
So they are elected for 4 years. Now they can step down, but they will still technically be elected. But they will just apply for like what do you call it when you give me 1 sec. I have to Google this word. They can apply for like a leave sort of thing. A good example of this is one guy that stole money. Like he was in Parliament and he falsely claimed that he had been traveling a lot through his work, and then he needed to get all of this money refunded. It turned out he had been on vacations and shit like that.
Yeah.
And he had to go to prison, and he is still technically an elected official. So, there you go. Anyway,
I'd need to look at our constitution. I just quickly googled like TDs who've resigned, and we have had TDs who resigned. I'd need to look into it, but I think there's nothing in our constitution that like holds people to those positions. It just means if they resign, a by-election is held where that seat is replaced.
Yeah. So here they usually just resign after a period or 4 periods in office. So
Okay, that's interesting.
So it's basically like, oh yeah, the next election I won't be running.
Because the way in Ireland it works is you're elected, and then the constitution states that another election must be held a maximum of 5 years from that date.
Oh, really? Wait, how long is your electoral periods?
They last until the Taoiseach dissolves the government, and the longest that can happen is 5 years.
Oh, okay. So
I'm being deliberately obtuse with this one because the way our constitution is written, it's not that TDs are elected for 5 years. It's TDs are elected, and then at any moment the government can be dissolved with a majority, meaning they're in government until government dissolves itself, and government can be in power for a maximum of 5 years. But it's like that's not their term. Their term is as long as the House has the confidence in the actual Parliament itself, and they can dissolve it at any moment.
Yeah, so the Parliament in Norway can, of course, say that we have no confidence in a certain minister, for example, and if the government says, but we do have confidence in this person, and that goes to a vote in Parliament, and the Parliament votes to out that person, then the government breaks up and we will have to form a new government. It rarely happens. Last time it happened was 20 years ago. And that ended up with, like, it was a fairly conservative government that had to step down, and the Labour Party had to step up, and it was an election 1 year after, and the Labour Party got crushed in that election.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's like people in the Labour Party usually wish for a Conservative Party to sit out their period.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's funny actually is like on principle from a Republican position, I have an issue with like if there's a scandal with a politician, I have an issue with the other politicians like holding election to evict that member, because as far as I'm concerned, it's the people who elected that person ultimately get to decide. So if you're holding an election to evict him, that should be held in that constituency by the people who held the damn vote. Because if you think about it, everyone who voted for that politician is a small subset of the country. So everyone else then gets to elect somebody who gets to decide whether that person goes or not. Notice how we've sidestepped the people voting here.
Yeah, that's absolutely...
Which is why I think it's not really democracy unless the people get to recall somebody. Because right now, like I said, it's participatory oligarchy. It's the government coming to the people and saying, "Hey, come to the banquet table, have this lovely meal. We're going to put a paper down in front of you where we want your signature, and if you if you sign off on us, then we will argue that we have a mandate from you, but then never give a shit about you ever again."
Yeah, the only issue though is that if you take and again I'm gonna reference Norwegian politics. If you have a let's say okay, so the Conservative Party was previously in government with the Progress Party, which is a right wing, not progressive at all party. And one of their ministers, so one of the Progress Party's ministers, she had posted a really nasty picture about the Labour Party, saying that they support terrorism, which is interesting because the Labour Party is the only party in Norway that has been victims of terrorism. But so there was a whole thing whether or not she would have to be voted out and stuff like that. So the Progress Party had at that time about 17. They were polling at about 17%. So if we had left that to the people, well, all of the people on the other side of the aisle would have voted to get her out, and that would have been a majority of people. So she, like, by that logic, she should never have been in that position at all.
Well, it's I don't. Do you have single? Do you have proportional representation, or is it just first past the post? Is it like whoever gets the most votes, or do they need to meet a quota?
We have. Oh God, how can I explain it? We have a proportional thing where it's like people in the northern part of Norway. There are way less people living there, so their votes count more. It's kind of like electoral college stuff. I don't know if that answered your question.
I've googled elections in Norway to see if I can just spot it here, because it's
yeah. So
if
like
it's single, if it's proportional representation, then no, I do understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you cross 4%, then you get extra mandates because like some extra like proportional mandates. But if you're below 4%, then you're gonna have to live with whoever you get into parliament.
Yeah, I think I'd need to look into it, because off the top of my head, I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I'm planning on doing a whole Norway episode of this thing, so we can leave it for now. I am more interested in Ireland today, anyway.
Oh, yeah. But it's as a universal, like, what I can say is like I'm not, for me, when you elect people into a parliament, you don't entrust within them the right to eject people from that parliament. That's your job as the electorate.
Yeah.
You get to eject people. It's a House of Representatives. Now, I know it's not called that, but that is in function what they're pretending to be. And are they really representing you if you don't get to decide? And somebody this might have been the situation you were bringing up, or somebody might then say, but what if that group, like, what if that part of the country won't reject them, like won't pull them back? Well, then I'd say, well, then as a society, it is your job to change that. It is your job to get in there and change that society, because notice how that still pulls back to the socialist ideal of you need to influence your community, you need to develop solidarity. Fuck the house. The house is a House of Representatives. Somebody gets picked out of that community to represent that community. So functionally, it's the community that has to change, not the person in the seat.
All right, then. So, okay, so I want to move things along a little bit. How do you feel? What is the average Irish person's view of socialism, do you think?
At the moment, between neutral and positive, I don't think there's that many people who view it negatively. However, I don't think we'd have many Marxists. Like, I don't think we'd have people who'd be like far left. Our recent election, saw a huge swing for left of centre parties. Sinn Fein surged to having their best ever electoral win, where they got basically like 1/4 of all first preference votes in the entire country. Like 1 in every 4 first preference cast was cast for a Sinn Fein candidate. And Sinn Fein exist as like a left wing Republican party who campaign on the idea of not Marxist socialism, but social democracy and kind of like that left of centre. I call it putting oven mitts on capitalism as opposed to chopping off capitalism's hands. But hey, it's still left wing. Like they see themselves as critiquing and trying to in some way inhibit the capitalist system. They're not doing enough as far as I'm concerned. But hey, I won't like if I'm in a sinking ship and somebody is helping me with a bucket, I'm not going to criticize them for the size of their boat.
So Toko1 in chat says that the average Irish view on socialism depends on where in Ireland you live, in my opinion. Do you have
That's a very good point.
So,
like in the cities, as is always the case.
So
as is always
just as a very like beside the point. You know the northern part of Ireland, like not Northern Ireland, but the northern part of Ireland.
The northern part of the Republic.
Yeah. So what would you call that? Like, I assume you wouldn't call it Northern Ireland.
1 sec. Let me.
This is just like a complete. I just had a thought. The border count.
If you Google like a county map of Ireland, just so that I can just point at counties.
Yeah.
Let me know when you have a counties map of Ireland open, just so I can see what you mean.
Let's see. So like, what would you call Derry, Antrim, Tyrone, Donegal?
I know exactly what you're talking about now. It's Derry, Tyrone, Fermanagh, Armagh, Down, and Antrim are all. That's the partitioned part of the island that's currently under British occupation. Depending on your political persuasion, its political name, its internationally recognised name is Northern Ireland. I refer to it as the Occupied Six.
Oh, okay.
It is 6 occupied counties that exist in the historic province of Ulster that exists on the island of Ireland. There is a national sense of community based on that island, that geography. So Ireland and the nation of Ireland is an island nation with a shared sense of solidarity. So I refer to Tyrone, Derry, Antrim, Down, Armagh and Fermanagh as the Occupied Six. In terms of, is that what you meant, kind of like the north of the island of Ireland? Okay, yeah.
If you were to look at like a map of Norway or Sweden or any country really, then you could look at like the northernmost part of the different countries, and most people would refer to that as like northern Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland. But I'm guessing you don't do that with Ireland.
No, it's funny because like the politically administrative region is called Northern Ireland, because there's the Republic of Ireland, which is like Cavan is in the Republic of Ireland, Monaghan is in the Republic of Ireland, Louth, the Leitrim and Donegal are in the Republic of Ireland. So everything then south of that is the Republic. So it's the Republic and the north of Ireland. Most Irish people just refer to it as the North. Republican socialists, we tend to refer to it as the Occupied Six because we don't recognise the Anglo-Irish Treaty as being we don't recognise it as being legitimate. We think it was the cordoning off of a territory that did not belong to the British. So their administrative control we don't recognise. As far as we're concerned, the PSNI, which is the police service in Northern Ireland, is an occupying military force masquerading as a civilian police force because police don't exist on foreign territory.
All right.
If police from Sweden were in Norway, would you call them police, or does that feel like a military to you now?
Yeah, that suddenly feels like a military.
Yeah, and that's where we're coming from. A police service that exists in the north of Ireland To us, that's just an armed force that yet again is claiming to own the territory of the island of Ireland. So we call it the Occupied Six, but this is a Republican Socialist perspective. The majority of people will just call it Northern Ireland. They have a football team and they call it Northern Ireland, so we'll give it to them.
Okay. So in that sense, like, what would those people? How do you differentiate between Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland? Like the country and the counties.
Yeah. What's handy is because, like, are you still looking at the map?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Donegal, Fermanagh, Cavan, Monaghan, Armagh, Tyrone, Derry, Antrim and Down are all part of a province called Ulster. So historically, when we're referring to the north of the island, we'll just say Ulster. There's 4 provinces, and we usually kind of like group the geographic regions by those provinces. If you just Google like provincial map of Ireland, you'll see the provinces.
Let's see.
And you'll see instantly how easy it is for us to like the Midlands will be between Connacht and Leinster. The south is Munster. The west is Connacht. The east is Leinster. The north is Ulster.
All right. Well, that was a very much beside the points kind of thing. So it was
welcome
just
to Geography with Zahnzee.
Indeed.
But as Toko1 in chat said, like the nationalist communities in both kind of like the north and the south will refer to as like the Occupied Six or the north. It's mainly the nationalist communities. You have what are called unionist communities, which would they would typically be either Protestant or loyal to the British Crown, who would recognise Northern Ireland as a nation state, where they believe that they're a nation like Scotland and Wales and England are, that constitutes a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Republicans, we obviously reject this outright because, one, we do not think a monarch has a right to claim a territory, and 2, we do not believe that the monarch in charge of the political entity called the United Kingdom has the right to claim any territory on the island of Ireland.
All right. So when we're talking about nationalist communities, what's your take on and I need to sort of specify it because, you know, language and what we tie to a word. But if I were to say like a national form of socialism, like not as in Nazism, but a more like less international version of actual socialism, what would your sort of take on that be for in Ireland's case?
I'm just pulling up a document that I want to reference, written by James Connolly in 1897, called Socialism and Nationalism, and that was 1897. So there has been a concept of intertwining nationalism and socialism long before Hitler ever got his fucking teeth into the bastardized version of Marxism that he abandoned the proletarian struggle in. But no, it's a perfectly reasonable question, because nationalism typically and predominantly falls into a very reactionary mode of being very pride focused, very patriotic focused, very incensed upon kind of like an imperial mode of existing. The best example I can think of right now in our part of the world is the Brexit movement was a chauvinistic nationalist movement of England first. Oh wait, yeah, Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, you're part of us too. Fuck ya. You're not England, you know, George's Cross, yeah. But no, it's that sense of pride without giving a shit about who you trample on. That's how nationalism tends to primarily express itself, unless you start looking to indigenous communities. If you start looking to oppressed communities, typically the victims of colonialism will correlate around a national identity, because that national identity was enforced upon them and used as a part of their oppression. A really good example, there would be no Irish nationalism if the British Crown hadn't made a point of racializing the Irish people. Where we got held down because we were Irish. So we identified with that sense of oppression and said, well, fuck you. Like, screw you. If you're going to hate me because I'm Irish, well, then the Irish are going to fuck off and we're going to form our own nation. that sense of self-determination based off of a nationalist characteristic. Joseph Stalin actually did some work on this called, I think it was just called The National Question. I don't remember off the top of my head, where he basically argued that oppressed people, oppressed on the basis of their nationality, where they have a sense of national identity suppressed in order to allow a dominant imperial mode of nationalism suppress them, they have the right. They have the right to a revolution based on a nationalist characteristic. For instance, one of the things that I know about kind of like the history of Scandinavia is that I think Sweden and Norway used to be dominion territories of Denmark, and there would have been the right to a nationalist revolt based off of, well, no, we're not Danes, we're Norwegian.
Yeah, Norway has.
We've no interest in invading Sweden. We've no interest in invading Sweden or Finland. We just want our territory to be respected as being uniquely ours, with a sense of we shouldn't be oppressed because of that.
Yeah.
Now, all of this has to be caveated with the idea that if you then turn that into an extremist ethnocentric focused movement where it's Norway for the Nords, it's no longer indigenous nationalism, it's now chauvinistic nationalism, and I have to clarify that.
No, Norway has been historically screwed by both Denmark and Sweden for hundreds of years, which is interesting because if you look today, Norway is the one with all the money, but
because they got the oil.
Yeah, we invented the oil in the 1960s.
I love it.
Yeah, so and that's actually super funny because we got it. We got a lot of ocean dirt cheap from Denmark. I think they might have actually just gifted it to us. And then some years later we found oil all over the place that we had just been given from Denmark. I think they would probably be a little bit pissed at that.
Kind of reminds me of the Soviet Union sold Alaska to the United States, and then the United States found a shit ton of oil there.
Yeah, but I actually want to give you a Lord Saether special prize. You are the first one that I've ever had on this channel to reference Stalin in the way that you do.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know enough about Stalin in and of his writings. I just know that most people that I have ever conversed with any historical degrees or any feel for history seem to dislike the man.
I'm not a fan of him personally. I think he set back the communist cause significantly. Now, there's historical reasons why this might have happened. I think he was a fundamentally paranoid individual who was very incessantly focused on that one, socialism in one country policy, and then basically had an empire fall on his lap when the Red Army marched back the Nazi threat and occupied a lot of Eastern Europe. So suddenly you had a socialism in one country forming a union of communist states. I'm not sure anyone could have dealt with that. History fucked the Soviet Union in a lot of ways, because when Lenin led the Bolsheviks to seize the Russian state, I don't think they envisioned they would become a superpower, inheriting a huge swathe of country that had previously been under Nazi occupation. History unfolded in a crazy way, but the text I cited, he actually wrote while he was in exile from Russia in 1917, I think it was. So it's as far as I'm concerned, it's isolated from his atrocities, where it just feels weird to me to ignore that text to then cite the things he did 30 odd years later. I have my issues with Stalin. I don't think he represented the issues of communism well. Now, I think there's justifications for everything. Not justifications, Jesus Christ. I think you can explain. I think you can explain things he did using the historical understanding of the time, while never, ever trying to diminish the responsibility. For instance, the famine that happened in Ukraine, that was an administrative fuck up on the part of the Soviet system, and the bureaucracy that existed in that organization created the incentives for that famine to occur. They need to own that shit. And I say this to Marxist-Leninists, you need to own that and understand that your system created that problem. Now, we can explain it away, but the problem is you should never explain away the end result. Explain away the propaganda surrounding it, but still understand that, like, people being fed on your watch, if they don't get fed, it's your problem.
Yeah,
I just want to clarify that out.
Yeah, I told you this once before, but I do get the whenever someone brings up atrocities that happened in the USSR, I do feel like there's always an ML ready to say that it didn't happen, and like I told you the last time I spoke to you about this, it never feels any more comfortable hearing lefties say that something historically accurate didn't happen. Like, it feels very Holocaust denial-y when, for example, someone is talking about how the Holodomor didn't happen.
It's called the Holodomor, yeah.
Yeah, or the Katyn massacre, for example. Like, I always get a bad taste in my mouth whenever I hear someone that's supposed to be on the left be like, no, that didn't happen.
Like, don't lionize states. Like, at the end of the day, a state is a means of transitioning from one economic system to another. There's nothing, like, quote unquote good about the Soviet Union. Everything good about it was what it was trying to do. But don't lionize the state. Understand that functionally it's a means to an end. And, like, I consider them experiments worth learning from, but I get annoyed when people call them successes because, well, where are they?
Yeah,
they collapsed into oligarchical capitalist nightmares.
Oh, that's gonna be a very interesting thing to because I'm having a very interesting guest on in one of these segments I'm going to guess a couple of weeks, and he is a very intelligent man from Iraq. Let's just say it like that.
I like Hakeem.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely, and I'm super stoked to have him on. But I
don't think he'd disagree with anything I've said. He probably just wouldn't characterize it as a failure.
Yeah, that's the thing.
He would identify the experiment as a success in terms of how it demonstrated the ability to create conditions outside of a capitalist mode of production, of trying to be something new that focused upon social well-being above profit. And I mean, hey, you can call that success. The reason I don't is because it don't exist no more. And to me, that's just nail in the coffin. If it don't exist anymore, then it fails it failed dialectic. It failed to produce a synthesizing result to actually produce a society that could continue itself. It's like Gramsci and Althusser created critiques where, like, fundamentally, I think the USSR, it didn't address the hegemonic values existing within the society. So it itself produced a society that did not aware that it was perpetuating capitalist ideals. Like, Gorbachev brought in Pizza Hut. What the fuck was he thinking? What was he trying to do? But yeah, it's this isn't a conversation about the USSR anyway. And I'm actually really looking forward to the episode with Hakeem now that you mentioned it, because I want to hear about left-wing organizations in Iraq.
Oh yeah,
for more than anything, just to hear how different it is from us in the West. Yeah. Because we need to be aware that this is an international movement, not just a Western-centric movement, so we can pat each other on the back about getting universal healthcare.
Oh yeah, I'm super stoked to have him on, and also the fact that, and that's kind of my project, you know. I've said so from the start that, hey, if I could get a socialist from Ghana to come on, that would be amazingly cool. By the way, Toko says that the USSR didn't sell Alaska; it was the Russian Empire in 1867. From what I have read, Katyn was done by Nazis. And the Holodomor did happen, but was accelerated by the kulaks slaughtering livestock and burning grain. Yeah, can you ask Zahn Zee on this CPI/CYM split?
Yeah, just very quick to mention, it's I actually didn't realize it was 1867. That makes it even worse, because functionally, like, again, I'm a Republican. Kings, czars don't control territory. The people living in those territories do. Like, a place is functionally the end result of the communities that that place produces. So a king sat in a fucking throne 7 million miles away does not get to determine where that land goes. The people living in that place should. So, like, the people in that place got royally fucked over because they're now living in the imperial heartland. They got fucked harder than a lot of people. One of the things that I do want to mention in terms of like that, even like Toko mentions, like that the kulaks accelerated it, but notice the choice of wording, they accelerated. It was still the responsibility of the people wielding administrative power. They didn't prevent it. Like, again, we can use history to explain why it happened, but functionally, if you wield a state, and like this is something MLs just, they need to bear this. If you want to utilize states, you inherit all of the problems that come with states. And when you wield totality of administrative control, you're responsible for the end result of that control. Otherwise, you acknowledge the anarchists are right and states are incapable of controlling societies, or controlling the distribution of resources to societies. You just like you just have to accept the problems that come with states. And I say this as a Republican. I want a state. I like states. I think states can be useful, but you got to own the problems with states, and that is ultimately the buck fucking stops with you. And if you don't prevent it, it's your problem. You were elected to run the damn thing. The CPI CYM split. I talked about it earlier. It was the CPI, the CYM felt that they were kind of being used as a gateway into communism, and like them as an organization were being like utilized by the CPI, but not actually having their role treated seriously. Young people who came into the CPI were not being referenced, or kind of like recommended to join the CYM. So like you had young people coming into the Communist Party not being told there's a youth wing, because it, from the CYM's perspective, they thought that the CPI was kind of growing a bit kind of sick of their influence, because at the moment the CYM has more public appeal. They have more public reach. More people know that the Connolly Youth Movement exists than the CPI exists. So more people were aware of a youth group of a party than the party that youth group was attached to. And there was really kind of like this feeling that from the CYM's perspective, I'm not in the CPI, so I can't speak to their perspective. The CYM really felt like they were not being considered a part of the organization. Let me post it in chat, because they did release a statement. Movement split. Because where is it?
By the way, I just want to point this out to you. I mentioned it to my chat when you were out doing the PP. I just find it very interesting to talk to you about these things, because I realize that I need to read up on theory, I need to read up on history, and I just feel very much like a layman socialist. And it's so interesting to me, because when I'm talking to other how can I say it without it sounding very when I'm talking to other people that aren't as versed in theory and history of all these different movements, I usually feel like I know quite a bit, and then I talk to you and I'm like, yeah, I have no fucking idea of what I'm doing.
I'm afraid that I'm now carrying too much confidence in my voice, because I'm a layman. I've never studied history at university level. I tried. I had to leave because of fucking money reasons. Let me quickly just bitch about this for a second. At the start of the year, I was trying to do an arts degree where I wanted to study sociology, politics, philosophy, and history. What a collection of subjects. That would have been so much fun. In history, the document analysis that I had to do, that was like 30% of my final grade, was a document analysis on a document James Connolly wrote in like 1902 called the Manifesto of the Irish Republican Socialist Party. How perfect was that?
Would have been right down your alley.
Oh, 100%. I had to withdraw from the course because I couldn't, I had to choose between paying my tuition fees or paying my rent. And well, it's difficult to go to college in a pandemic if you can't be inside.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, but my point is like the further this conversation has progressed, the more terrified I actually am getting of talking to Hakeem at some point.
I talked to Hakeem when I had a fraction of the understanding that I know now, and I found him a thoroughly nice and inviting person. I think I had 26 YouTube subscribers when I talked to him.
Oh, really? Well, I have like 100 YouTube subscribers.
What Toko said there, I fucking wish I knew about the Connolly Youth Movement. I only found out about them about a year ago.
Oh.
Actually, again, don't forget, I'm 31. I'm not. I'm too old to be a part of the group. So it's now that I'm thinking about it, if they knew I was a fucking Marxist, like a Republican socialist, they probably just would have put me up. But then again, at the other side, it's like I've got a partner, so I have her interest to be caring about as well. So it's not just about me. Like I have to prioritize her well-being as well. And like ultimately, keeping a roof over her head was more important than me going to college.
I sort of get that point. All right. Let's see. What do we have? Do you have anything else about socialism in Ireland? That actually, I do have a nice question about it. So okay. So seeing as you live on the island of Ireland, and you do have the unfortunate effect of sharing some space with some Northern Ireland people. How is the socialists? How are the socialists in Ireland communicating with the socialists in Northern Ireland? Like, do they have any? Is there any clashing, or are they more friendly with each other? Do they wish to like reunite Ireland as a whole thing, or do you know anything about it?
I would know what's kind of like recorded. Like Sinn Fein never abandoned the the Unity project. Right through, it's like Sinn Fein always like I'm talking about like the Sinn Fein of the 1920s that unfortunately lost the Civil War. The party that Eamon de Valera was a part of before he eventually split, when he split to form Fianna Fáil, when he proposed a motion to abandon abstentionism, to have Sinn Féin TDs taking their seats in the Dáil, because a party called Cumann na Gael had basically unopposed led the country for a while. Fun fact, Cumann na Nail banned the Communist Party of Ireland and made them criminalised. When Eamon de Valera split from Sinn Féin and went into power at Fianna Fáil, he actually rescinded that and allowed the Communist Party of Ireland to exist in Ireland. So there's an interesting perspective, and I'll get to why that's interesting in a while. But like Sinn Féin throughout its history has been an all-Ireland party. Most socialist countries, most socialist parties in the island are all-Ireland parties, because socialists fundamentally understand the message that James Connolly was trying to espouse, and that's fundamentally the issue affecting the Irish working class person is a matter of class and not religion. The north of Ireland was occupied by just Owen 27. Cumann na Nail weren't fascists. However, they joined forces with I think it was the Irish National Convention in like 1933, who were known as the Blue Shirts, or Owen O'Malley's Blue Shirts. They were fucking fascist. They tried to march on Dublin. Cumann na Nail were an agrarian group who they were like very like centre right, not right wing, but hey, they associated with fascists. So, you know, like if there's 4 seats at a table and there's like 3 people and 1 fascist, and those 3 people don't get up, you 4 fascists at a table.
Oh yeah, that's what I used to say, is that at some point, like if you have fascists in your movement, you are either okay with them being fascists or you are a fascist yourself, and at some point there's no difference.
So, sorry, I got reading caps, not caps. I got reading chat for a second there. But no, exactly that. Like, if you will not push back on the fascists within your societies, if you will not push back on the fascists within your midst, then what you are doing is you're implicitly consenting to the policies those fascists will introduce. And we've seen that with Fine Gael, like in recent times. Like Fine Gael, they claim they're centre right. As far as I'm concerned, they're moving more and more right wing with each fucking passing moment. Heavily involved in market solutions, heavily adopting neoliberal policies. They like we are currently in the worst housing crisis that the state has ever known. But somebody mentioned in chat that we have a shit ton of empty houses. The reason we have a load of empty houses is because in 2008 we had a housing bubble that smashed on us. And the Fianna Fáil government set up a national assets management agency called NAMA, and they basically bought up all of the outstanding mortgage loans. So there was a load of property that was owned but not mortgaged, or was mortgaged and evicted, where there's a lot of property. Those properties were then sold to international vulture funds. So there's a shit ton of empty houses that's private property, and we have homeless people. That's unforgivable. It's estimated that there's like 2 empty houses per homeless person in Ireland. Like only the commodification of property could allow for a homeless person to exist. It's fucking disgusting. And Fine Gael actively believe in like sharing. They want to build apartment complex. They're like sharing, like 2 or 3 people like in a room with shared washroom facilities, whereas Fianna Fáil for a long time was a social democrat party who believed in social housing. Fianna Fáil are now in bed with Fine Gael, and they've basically become the centre-right party that they argued their entire history that they weren't. Fianna Fáil has become as bad as anybody fucking else. So there's an opportunity for left-wing governments. So there's an opportunity for a left-wing government in Ireland because of the absolute failure of governance of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I am kind of ranting. Do you want to pull me back on topic?
Oh no, actually, I find this very interesting. I'm reading like a little bit about Fine Gael on Wikipedia, and it seems like they are a Christian Democratic Liberal Conservative Party. So that would
that's what it says.
Yeah, so that would be akin to like the Christian Democratic Party of Norway, I guess. But Fianna Fáil, what's that?
Fianna Fáil. They were the there's in the Gaelic language there's kind of like accents that go over our vowels. So there's a little kind of like mark above the A.
Yeah.
That turns it from an A to an A sound. So it's Fianna Fáil, or from an A to an O.
Okay.
So it's Fianna Fáil.
Fianna Fáil. So what's that party?
Yeah. They used to be a social democrat party, centre left. They were the Sinn Fein, anti-monarchy, rejected the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1922, or it's 23, I don't remember. Like they used to be centre-left Republican, and for a long time they presented a centre-left opposition to Fine Gael, but around the 1950s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, they started swinging into that neoliberal mode, and now they are basically centre-right, if not swinging right-wing themselves.
Okay, so Eowyn is saying that Fianna Fáil means soldiers of destiny. I'm sorry, but that, first of all, that name, like, if that, yeah, the meaning of that is kind of cringe. Like it sounds very fashy. But all right. Let's see.
I mean, who they were at the time? They were descendants of Sinn Fein, like Republican Sinn Fein, who would have had their militant wing in the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, who eventually went on to form the IRA. Back when the IRA was like unquestionably good, didn't have a stain to their name, unless you're British, and then you have obvious issues with the IRA. Actually, you have issues with the IRA no matter at what point in their history. We didn't even get into like the black and tans and the fucking the shit that the fucking British did during the 1920s to Ireland. It's Google Bloody Sunday at some point in your life,
Oh,
and
Bloody Sunday. I know about
and
that.
find yourself disgusted at the British institutions of how they can claim that Europe is trying to destroy them. 15 British soldiers walked into a stadium during a game and opened fire on the players and people in the stands.
Yeah. So, okay. So, listen. There are some more questions. Zahn Zee, opinion on computing forever. Do you think he's a closet fascist? I actually want to join in on an answer here, but you are going to get the floor first.
The problem, I think his name is Dave, Computing Forever. I just haven't given him enough attention, but I have heard nothing that in any way endears me to any of his politics. He seems like a garbage tier, surface level anti-SJW who has kind of like crypto-fascist technocratic tendencies attached to him, where like he's huge on the like free speech train, but then absolutely would not at all be opposed to suppressing the freech of communists. He doesn't seem to be I can't say he's a fascist because I just don't know. But if he was, I wouldn't be somebody putting up a fight if somebody called him one.
Yeah. So my take on this guy is that because I watched a couple of his videos, and my take on him is that he seems like he used to just be like a garden variety conservative at some point, and then he has moved so far into the rabbit hole of anti-SJW thinking that he has effectively become a crypto. So, yeah. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Have you ever heard about the Miami Showban killings?
I haven't, no.
So, it's. Let's see. It has. I'm gonna link you to the Wikipedia thingy. It was an attack on July 31st, 1975, Loyalist Parliamentary Group. No, paramilitary group, sorry. Ulster Volunteer Force? Is it?
The UVF, yeah. God, I used to know the history behind this. Back around the 1920s when like there was tensions happening in the back then it wasn't the south, it was just around Dublin. Like a thing that's very important to understand about the history of Ireland is that the British Empire in the 1500s and the 1600s did a series of colonizations of like plantations of Ireland where they put landed gentry into kind of like the occupied lords of Ireland. There used to be kind of like a normal influence into Ireland where we had lots of kind of fiefdoms and kingdoms. When King Henry V kind of like invaded in the 1500s and like decimated the country, those manors and those lordships were basically kind of like given to like English aristocracy to rule over those places. So there was a plantation of Leinster, which was relatively easy because of the Pale. I'm throwing a lot of phrases out here at the moment. The Pale was a period of like English occupation from like the 1200s around Dublin and kind of like the East Coast. There was the Munster plantation, which wasn't hugely successful because Munster tended to have this like fiercely like rebelistic attitude to them where they just would not accept foreign kind of like dignitaries. Like two cities in Munster, Limerick and Cork. Limerick has a kind of like there's a castle there and there's a treaty stone where like that's kind of like a monument that they revere, they love it because I think they held out. I don't remember the history behind it, but like Cork is referred to as the rebel county. They're like fiercely independent and like the plantation didn't really stick. Connacht is basically limestone. There's nothing there. When there was a British Protestant, I think he was a Protestant, I don't remember, Oliver Cromwell, he won the War of the Roses, the British Civil War, and he invaded Ireland and he basically massacred a huge amount of the population. And there was a phrase he had called "to hell or to Connacht," where it was, "I am going to displace you to Connacht or I'm going to slaughter you where you stand."
Oh.
But the plantation that was the most effective was the plantation of Ulster. And Ulster is the historic region that I pointed out to you earlier, where I think it was King James, incredibly detailed maps were drawn up. Like Ulster for a while was one of the most accurately surveyed places on the planet. Because the British Crown was trying to I think it was just England at this point. It wasn't Britain yet. England was trying to create a sense of like Britishness in the island of Ireland, and a lot of Scottish kind of aristocrats were settled into the north, and there was a huge Protestant population up in the north of Ireland who saw themselves as British because one of the primary characteristics of division between Ireland and England was Ireland was Protestant, England was Protestant, Ireland was Catholic. So in a way, your Irishness was summed up in your Catholicness, and your Englishness was summed up in your Protestantness. So to be English was to be Protestant. So if you were in the north of Ireland, if you were Protestant, that meant your allegiance was to England and not to Ireland. And the majority of the people in Ulster was Protestant. So for a long time, there was huge kind of like pro Britain, pro Crown, pro monarchy. And I mentioned earlier, like unionists. That unionism finds itself in that Protestant plantation ethic.
Yeah. So the Protestant versus Catholic kind of thought is basically what we in Norway, or way back when I was in school, that's sort of what we learned about when it came to Ireland's Ireland and Northern Ireland, Ireland and Britain. That a lot of it was based around that, but I don't know. I always question whether or not it's that simple. Whenever I'm presented with facts like that.
Well, as Marxists, we identify that religion itself is an expression of social material conditions. In kind of like that sense of, be honest, this even kind of like comes in with the scholarship surrounding religion, that religion is an expression of societies, and kind of like it's a sense of communal expression in terms of how you collectivize a sense of experience that exists in a transcendental mode, where you're thinking about how it is to express ideas that don't exist, kind of like within I'm butchering all of this obviously, but we identify that religions are not what define people. It's the material realities of the society that they exist within. And a Catholic and a Protestant, both in the north of Ireland, are proletariat first, Protestant and Catholic second. Yeah. They exist as workers exploited first, and then their religious communal societal aspects are weaponized to source a fractious division in that solidarity of a class sense of shared identity and shared alienation. So we identify, and Republican socialists hold this a view, that the occupation of the North is not based on religious sectarian lines. It's based off of the stoking of sectarian tensions to keep a unified class from unifying. Because if they did, they would understand that their interests are in kind of like a socialism of understanding that Britain doesn't give a shit about you. Like to quote James Connolly, let me get this line here. It's do I have it? If you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist the green flag over Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of a socialist republic, your efforts will be in vain. England would still rule you. She would rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualist institutions she has planted in this country and watered with the tears of our mothers and the blood of our martyrs. England would still rule you to your ruin, even while your lips offered hypocritical homage at the shrine of that freedom whose cause you had betrayed. Nationalism without socialism, without a reorganisation of society on the basis of a broader and more developed form of that common property, which underlay the social structure of ancient era, is only national recurrency. Notice how in everything I've said, there's not a single mention of Protestant or Catholic. It's identifying the idea that England will suppress you for its gain, and it will rule you through the institutions it's planted, and using those institutions will sow division based off of arbitrary characteristics. There isn't a Catholic proletariat and a Protestant proletariat. There is a proletariat. And Catholics and Protestants have more interest in unifying to overthrow the oppression and alienation they feel than sectarianism of dividing those communities. Because fundamentally, and history has proved this, Brexit has proved this, the Unionists have been abandoned by Westminster.
So
Unionism should be dead, but they're still attached to it because of those sectarian tensions that allow you to create a sense of false consciousness so that you can kind of like never realize that sense of alienation. It's in the interest of capitalists to keep the North divided, because if they united, then they kick out the British capitalists.
yeah. So let's talk about Brexit for like a short minute, because
Yeah. I'm just going to run to the bathroom for 2 seconds.
oh, okay. Well, then let's not talk about Brexit just yet.
We can get back to Brexit. I'll be 2 seconds.
Yeah. How are you guys doing? Are you doing fine? I think this is turning out pretty great. Like, I do feel like we have strayed a little bit away from just socialism in Ireland, but again, Zahn Zee is just so intelligent that I just enjoy hearing him talk about these different parts of history. And also we can actually tie all of this back into Ireland, and I hope that the goal is that he will hopefully do that close to the end of the talk. But yeah, their cultural roots lie in the nation outside of the UK. I was going to try to wait. Where did Chud disappear to? There he is. He's a verified user. How do you make people? I'm gonna fix that at a later point, or maybe I can fix it now. Let's see. There you go. And he's back.
I'm back,
people.
Yeah. Lovely.
All right, so let's talk quickly about Brexit. Seeing as you guys aren't a part of the UK, it's not too interesting in what we're talking about. But I do want to ask, like, how Brexit definitely affects you, as you are literally connected. You are the only country connected by land to the UK.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how? Tell me a little bit about that.
The first thing to mention is like Brexit deeply affects Ireland, both the island and the two political unions attached to it. The Republic of Ireland, a huge amount of our trade goes through Britain, and a lot of our trade into mainland Europe goes through Britain to go through the Calais Tunnel. So like England having its like just like Mardi Gras party of deciding fuck we want the world again, that has horrendously fucked over a huge swath of the Irish economy, because so much of our economy relied upon Britain's access to the EU. And exactly like you mentioned, we are the only land bridge to the UK. And again, this all comes back to that that Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1922. Just to give a bit of background behind that Anglo-Irish Agreement is that the Irish, the IRA at the time when Ireland declared independence, and I think it was 1920, Ireland declared independence and fought a guerrilla war against British Crown forces, actively doing kind of like Michael Collins organized a kind of like why am I struggling with the words here? He kind of like he infiltrated and identified the British intelligence networks around Dublin, around the country, and he assassinated a lot of spies. And Britain sent over troops, and the IRA engaged in a guerrilla war to kind of like fight for their independence, really. One second, just taking a drink of water here. After this, the fighting essentially was leading towards massive British casualties, and it was losing popularity in Britain. So Britain sued for peace and basically said, "Okay, look, what are your demands? We'll give them to you. Let's just stop the fucking bloodshed." But all of the cards were in Britain's territory, because at the this is 1922. Britain is still the undisputed master and dominant world power. The United States hadn't emerged as the fucking industrial powerhouse it was. That only came around after the Second World War with the technological revolution, and because they were largely unaffected by the bombing. Britain was like the major player on the world stage, and a guerrilla warfare in one of its colonies, its nearest colony, had brought it to peace. Britain did not want to give in, because then it could lose Canada, it could lose India, it could lose its territories in the East Indies, it could lose Australia and New Zealand. Like, they did not want to lose that. So what they did is they offered, we're going to give the Unionists in Northern Ireland a border poll to decide whether or not they want to join the Irish Free State, and we're going to offer you an Irish Free State. But in this, we're going to give you like fuck all powers. We still basically rule you through foreign affairs, and you have to swear allegiance to the king. The Irish dignitaries who went over agreed to that deal. The Unionists in the north rejected it, meaning that a temporary border was erected in the north of the country that essentially went through, like, I think there's like 520 road passages through that border. It was never meant to be a political border. It was meant to be a partitioned, kind of like partitioning of a sole administrative region. It was never meant to be like a customs border. It was a demarked territory in the way that like a housing estate is. Like, Brexit is a problem 100 years in the making, and it's all because of that agreement. Like that's where that line was drawn. And it's like Republicans are sat here saying, for 100 years, we've been trying to get the British out of the north of this island, and right now they're threatening access to a single customs union. Like, now, we're opposed to the EU for other reasons, but at the same time, we acknowledge the economic necessity of being a member state. And the UK's vanity project of English nationalism put sectarian tensions at a huge case, because the IRA and Republicans in the north have stated, if you erect border posts and customs on between two parts of Ireland, we will bomb that. If you put a guard post between two Irish towns, that guard post shouldn't be there. So get your guards out of it, because we will bomb it. So I'm like the EU kind of likes its borders.
Yeah.
And the whole way through the Brexit negotiation, not once did the north of Ireland ever come up. It was all about taking back control. It was all about having political sovereignty. It was all about access to markets. It was all about London taking centre stage. Nothing about a forgotten part of the empire that they had ruled for 100 years because of an agreement with a state that seceded from the Union. That was not a political border. They just totally forgot about it. Like Britain always does. It ignores everything that isn't London.
Yeah.
And now we're in a case where the people of Northern Ireland have essentially a customs border down the Irish Sea, where they're in Britain, but not really, because, it's kind of annoying. Like, we don't want to have to do customs because, we promised Europe that we wouldn't, but, we will, but we won't. The whole thing basically is English nationalism trying to recapture a sense of glory without understanding the political ramifications of what Brexit meant.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Brexit as well. Like, the entire campaign was very dishonest in the way that, we all know that it was a dishonest effort to just break free from the EU, where they didn't really care about the different countries that would be affected by it. My favorite part is actually Scotland, that basically voted against their own independence because they were promised that, oh, if you vote for your independence, you won't get a seat in the EU. So they voted against it, and then Britain just leaves the EU, and you can look at the results for the electoral map for that, whereas the entirety of Scotland is like, we want to stay in the EU.
And let me just put a bit more detail to that, because in that Scottish independence referendum, not only was it like that, you'll get kicked out, it was England saying to Scotland that your economy fundamentally relies on access to the single market. And if you become independent, you are no longer a member state, meaning you'll have to apply and be put onto a 5 or a 10-year waiting list. Can your economy sustain itself for those 5 to 10 years? People in Scotland got scared and said, okay, maybe, you know, like being a part of Europe is kind of important to us and we can do that in the UK. 3 years later, Brexit happened.
Yeah. No, so, yeah, Brexit is just, it has screwed everyone over, really.
Here, by the way, I'm literally only after noticing the time at the moment. I usually have to end stream by 11. It's 11:30 at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So you have me for maybe another 10 to 15 minutes. Really sorry for that.
No,
I did not notice the time.
It's totally fine. I was planning on wrapping this up.
Okay.
But here's what we'll do. For the remainder of the time that I have you here, we can try to like sum up all the different parts that we've been talking about.
Yep.
And I'm gonna give you like the floor for this. So if you wanna try to sum up like how socialism or left-wing politics operates and works in Ireland, electorally or more activistically. Then you can try to do that, and also at the end of it, shout yourself out.
Not a bother. So socialism within Ireland, the island of Ireland, because fundamentally we don't really see a delineation between the British citizens who exist in the occupied 6 counties and people with a harp on their passport in the southern 26. Functionally, we recognise that we are an island people. We are a group of people who have Celtic origins, Celtic roots. And a lot of our roots come from the intermingling of cultural affects from Scotland, Wales and England. We recognise a common kinship with people across the water from us because of that Celtic heritage. However, we identify that that Celtic heritage has been suppressed and used in kind of like an antagonistic barbarianising of trying to diminish us as being lesser people because we're not quote unquote civilised Brits. I think it was Rudolph Churchill, Prime Minister of England in, I think it was 1912, I can't remember. It might have been actually Winston. He was on record of saying the Irish are a funny bunch. They flatly refuse to be British. So we've always identified that our nationality was a uniting feature in our oppression, in that we were suppressed because we were Irish. We were denied access to institutions because we were Irish. We weren't allowed to own homes because we were Irish. We were forced to starve on a staple crop that endured a blight in 1884, and we had all of our grain, our agriculture, our produce exported to Britain because we were Irish. We identified that that common national heritage was what was causing the source of that oppression, and then James Connolly in the late 1800s mobilized that national sense of alienation and wrapped it up in the Marxian cause of that historical dialectic to argue that your class relationship is the source of that national suffering. You would not be oppressed because you're Irish if you were not a disposable worker. So that being a worker is the root of your oppression. So if we can seize control of those means of production, we can remove that oppression from you. This island has been used as a breadbasket. There is no north and south of Ireland. There is just a group of oppressed workers who have to crawl out from beneath a capitalist boot who's suppressing them and siphoning profits through them. We have a unified stance between the people of the north and the people of the south, and Protestants, unionists, all of the alienation that they feel, all of the exploitation that they suffer at the hands of capitalists are the same exploitation that British landlords and financiers embedded into the Republic that still exist in those liberal capitalist institutions. The exploitative experience they feel is the same as what we feel, which is why we say there is no civil war existing between the Republic and the North. There is no sectarian tension between Catholics and Protestants. Fundamentally, what this is a dying capitalist empire desperately trying to hold on to what's last of its imperial holdings. So what we say is we will fight for you because fundamentally, as a worker, you are entitled to the fruits of your labour. This is the socialist project. This is why socialism on the island of Ireland is a Republican all-Ireland project. We don't see delineations of distinctions between Northern Ireland, British, all these different things. We have a shared ethno-linguistic root with the people of Scotland. Like, arguably, Ireland and Scotland could form a national identity in and of itself because of that shared cultural root. We identify all of the links we have with our nearest neighbour. All we ask them is to give us the right to self-determine what we do in the environment we exist within, so that we can self-curate a sense of solidarity based off of trying to make the best for everyone on this island for the best of everyone on this island. We have no interest in enriching a capitalist sat in Westminster, sat in New York, sat in Tokyo. We have no interest in applying the blood, sweat and tears of our brows so that we can enrich the wallets of somebody sat fucking oceans away. The point of enriching the lives of the people on this island is so that the people on this island can have a better life. And this has no distinction between the people of the North and the people of the South. There is no North and South. There is just an island, and we call for everyone on this island to recognise that socialism is how you achieve that sense of unity. And that's what socialism on this island is about. It's about restoring dignity to the worker, whether you're Protestant, whether you're Catholic, whether you're British, whether you're Irish, whether you're European. The point is you're being exploited. And that exploitation is being hidden under layers of sectarian abuse. We can identify that sectarian abuse, while it will be painful, it'll be raw, it'll be rough to overcome, it is not the thing that defines our existence. What defines our existence is that we are an exploited peoples living under exploitative mode of productions. It fundamentally is that capitalist system that pits worker against worker, that pits scab against striking worker, that pits mother and child against each other in you have to provide for me because the people of my place can't do it because all of their excess wealth is being siphoned off by a state that fundamentally wants to prioritise access to profits for corporations than providing services for healthcare, providing services for education, providing services for childcare, for goddamn sake. We have people who are being exploited for the benefit of private interests. That's the same in the North, that's the same in the South. The NHS is being dismantled. The HSE is being dismantled. We can create an all-island, all-Ireland health service based off of the tax income of people of the North and people of the South, because we recognise that everyone on this island has the same interests. And that is what socialism in Ireland is all about. It's recognising our shared interests and not being caught up in these petty sectarian bullshit that fundamentally is Britain's doing. Not ours, it's Britain's.
Thank you so much, man. I genuinely feel like I have learned a lot from this conversation, and I am also looking forward to talking to you about religion as we are. We could maybe do that on your stream.
Not a bother. One thing that I do want to say to you is I actually have amended my position where I don't think atheism is fundamentally irrational. I think it's confined itself to a certain perspective, which means that it's limited in its claims that it can make. It's not irrational. It's rational within that field or purview, but there's more to the conversation than that field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I got to you, in other words.
Yeah, and that's always talk to people because they'll give you perspectives.
Yeah. Hey, give yourself a shout out and.
Not a bother. 1 second, I'll open up. I have a thing called a link tree that if you don't have one yourself, I'd recommend you do. I'm going to post this in chat. Anybody who liked what I had to say, if you follow that, it'll bring you to my Twitch, my YouTube, my Twitter. Funny, on Twitch, I'm a speedrunner. I play games really quickly and just rant about politics all day. It's so much fun. But in my spare time, I also host a podcast called Left Thinking, where I introduce left-leaning people. Saether, I actually need to get you on and just hear your story.
Hey.
We can organise that in DMs at some point. But
yeah.
I get people on to just talk about their story, and it's all based around one question. Without mentioning tendencies or any particular labels, describe why the left wing matters to you. And it's about getting to the root of the humanistic aspect of socialism rather than getting into an argument between like, oh, you're an anarchist, yeah, you're a fucking tanky. No, let's just acknowledge that it's actually like the conditions people exist within. It's the hardships they've experienced, the loans they've not been able to pay off, the exploitative practices of kind of like different financial institutions that have like siphoned exploitative interest rates off of them. This is the shit that makes people suffer, and that's what alienates people. Like, it's not books that alienate you. Books just contextualize that alienation. Fundamentally, it's you living in your society that alienates you. So I want to hear about that society so that we can link people's experiences to understand that this is a shared struggle, not just an intellectual, abstracted struggle. So that's what left thinking is all about. But like you've heard, my name is Zahnzee. I'm an Irish Republican socialist. Old school Marxist. I'm a philosophy bro. I like talking about things. I need to get on more panels, but you can catch me doing speedruns. I'm currently learning Pokemon games. They're fun to play. They're infuriating to play, but they're fun to play. But follow that link tree. You can spot everything I do.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. I thoroughly loved this whole conversation. And
not a bother, my friend.
Yeah. And, well, we will be talking more because we are going to play Rust together.
Oh yeah, I may not be able to play tonight because it's past 11, so I need to quiet down. But I'll probably be on tomorrow anyway.
Oh yeah, nice. Okay, thank you so much, man, and I'll see you later.
Not a bother, my friend. Thanks a million.